Hey, Michael, welcome to the Interrupted Podcast, brother. I'm grateful for you taking the time tonight to have a little conversation and hopefully get some information out to all the listeners out there, add some value as always. And if anybody takes a little bit away from this conversation, I'll be more than grateful and very satisfied with where we're going. So our little lead up conversation that we had before this, I've been looking forward to this time. So thanks for being on tonight.
No, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, look, as we get into this, the listeners would have just heard a little bit about your bio that I laid down for them on the intro. But man, before we kind of get into some of your background and what you're doing now, what are you seeing? What are you excited about? What has your attention right now? Just with everything going on in society and your world and your network, man. What are you excited about?
For me, I think it's a combination of just being able to give my message out there. I know some of the things I grew up around and some of the things I've gone through. It was interesting to say the least because we all go through different events in life and sometimes we can't share it. So for me, one thing we talked about before the show started was mental wellness. And one thing I took an angle on is self-awareness in particular, because what I realized after multiple agencies, multiple positions, we still don't talk about who we are as people. We only
Mm,
talk about what the company is, what the agency is, what the organization is. And when you do that, you lose yourself. So we wonder why we're having all these retention issues. It's because nobody has an identity. People
mm.
only identify themselves with a paycheck. And when you do that, it's easy to jump to different agencies or other industries. So for me, when it comes to things that I'm looking forward to and bringing out is essentially that helping officers, helping people in law enforcement realize once you know who you are, you're going to understand how valuable you are to this industry.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That that goes into to so many areas. One of the things that really came to the surface when you were saying some of that was a lot of times right now, whether it's within first responders, law enforcement, paramedics, whether it's in different industries, a lot of times folks are focused on the problem being pay. And what we consistently see across the board is the financial aspect is one part of the equation, but it is not the biggest priority when it comes to anyone, particularly in a service profession. And when you said that, it's spot on. Like that job satisfaction, one, you want to be doing what you love, but you've got to understand your gifts, your roles, what you bring to the table, and what kind of value you bring to the program.
Yeah, and it's weird because we're not taught that in the academy, and it's crazy how when you start digging back into your trainings, it's like okay, we were never really taught to focus on ourselves early on. It was like, hey, this is the mission statement, this is our core values. Let's make sure you show you how to shoot a gun. Let's make sure you know how to talk to offenders. Let's make sure you know how to interview people just to get information. But we never took that time to say, once again, going back to who you are as a person. And it doesn't matter how much money you throw at people. If they're not happy, they're not going to work. They're not going to be effective. If they don't know their role, especially with the newer generations, which I'd love to see. I love when people are like, oh, why does this person keep asking why? Because they should know why they're doing what they do. They shouldn't just be robots just taking orders. And I know I do fall in, I'm like in the halfway mark of the new generation. I'm not all the way there because 18 years ago, I could tell you, you tell me what to do, I'm all in. Like I don't need to know the reason. I don't need to see the mission statement. I don't need to see a tack order. Just put me in the game, coach, and I'm ready to play.
Mm.
Nowadays, as I've grown and I've matured, I'm just like, well, maybe that isn't the smartest idea. Why are we doing this? So when I look at back at some of the trainings I had up to this point, I looked at gaps. I looked at misinformation that didn't really grow me. So I know it's not about the money for most people. I know it's the starting point, but there's a study out there, and it may be a little couple of years outdated, but they said that the average person, once you hit about 60 grand, everything after that is doesn't really make a difference because you everybody has a certain amount of money they need to survive. Now,
Hmm.
law enforcement, we're essentially blue collar workers. We're not we're not making 300,000 and 400,000 a year typically, unless you're a chief of a police in a high area or you're the sheriff of a big like a big city. But most of us are making anywhere from 40 to maybe 130 a year. Just depends on the city you're in. So that 60 mark I think is very relevant, but it makes me go back to it's not all about the money, Steve. It's not about how much more can we pour out you? Because at the end, people want to feel belonging, but they have to know why they want to feel that way.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's good, and
Mhm.
and hopefully some of what we'll get into today is going to help us land on some of that because a lot of times it's taking that responsibility upon yourself and understanding, yeah, what you bring to the table, but understanding that you're also part of a team when you bring something to the table. Because a lot of times we want to have that feeling that I matter and I'm irreplaceable and the ship's going down if I'm not a part of it. And that makes us feel all warm and fuzzy. But the reality is that's not the case. And how do we have satisfaction in what we're doing every day? How do we find meaning in what we do every day? Knowing that, yeah, when the time comes that I'm going to step away from this, the mission's going to continue. And it may look a little different, but I'm not the cornerstone of this
Right.
department. And that's that that gets into a much bigger conversation. But how do you feel about that when you hear that from folks? I know you're all over speaking and talking to folks, and um, we're starting to already get down a little path here. But I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
curious, since we're on it, man, I'd like to keep riffing on that. If you would talk about that a little bit, that whole cornerstone mindset that we see in folks.
Well, I realized it early in my career. Now, I didn't understand the reflection side of it, but I actually experienced it really early, about 3 years into my career as a police officer. And I was probably about 22, 23 at the time. I was approached by a captain after a roll call. So you guys know you're all excited. You're like, okay, what are we about to go do next? You got your roll call, your meeting, whatever, when you first start your shift. He pulled me to the side and he was like, hey, I've been watching you and I like the way you work. I like the way you handle calls. You're very proactive. You know
Hmm.
what? I want you on my traffic unit. So
Hmm.
for me, I was purely excited. I was like, man, that was the first time anybody ever approached me like that. Like, I was like, man, I'm about to go ride motorcycles. I'm about to go do traffic. So I was really excited about that. And when he told me that, it really boosted me up. I was like, man, I'm ready to go. So the position was announced. I put in for it. A few months passed, and then I saw an email come out that says selection, but my name wasn't in the email.
Hmm.
I was like, it, I felt like a hot air balloon, and someone just took the needle at the right size and plugged it, and I was in the sky just falling. And mind you, I didn't really tell anybody about this, so it was really just like an internal thing.
Sure.
So I saw that email, and all the energy just came out of me. Mind you,
Hmm.
22, 23, already a hard charger. I felt deflated. When that balloon came down, I was sitting there like I was pissed off. I was like, this guy done told me that I was gonna be a traffic officer. Now this email comes out, it has somebody else's name on it. He didn't tell me nothing. He wasn't like, hey, you know what, Michael, something came up. So I had a lot of animosity at the time, and I was looking at other careers. So when that happened, it literally just pushed me out the door completely. I was like, you know what, this is a sign. I don't have a place at this agency. They're not trying to build me up. And it wasn't like they weren't giving me things. I was on our special response team. I was a field training officer, FTO. So it wasn't like I wasn't getting opportunities, but it was just this particular one. And it's because someone came up to me, someone that was in the decision making process that said,
Hmm.
hey, Michael, I want you for this. That really hurt me. So as I became more wiser about 15 years later, I looked back at that story and I was just like, what was I thinking? Like,
Hmm.
I didn't get selected for a reason. There, the reason I didn't have to know about, but it was okay I didn't get selected. It was okay that I wasn't their number one choice because there's a reason for everything. And you don't just because you don't get selected or you don't get the position you want doesn't mean that's the end of your career. But for me at the time, it was that because I didn't know enough about myself. I didn't realize that there was all these other factors in me. So while I reflected, I realized that, you know what? Not everything's meant to be. And going back to being a cornerstone or being the number one guy or being that person that gets selected, if I known what I know today about then, I would have pushed through and went even harder. But because of my lack of wisdom, lack of maturity, it was like like I said, a shot in the stomach, or it was like me getting deflated because I just didn't know better. So when I look back at other things I've been through, other life experiences like that, I think everything happens for a reason. It's okay if I didn't make this team, or it's okay that I didn't get selected for this job because there's just more room for me out there to grow. But it also shows me that I can't rely on an agency to make me happy. I
Hmm.
can't rely on them to look at my dreams my goals or what's passionate to me and fulfill that. But it takes time and experience to realize that. However, that's part of what I do now. I want to show people that once you have your high level of value in yourself, when you have this rejection, when you have this failure, it's not going to be that bad because you know you're just going to get something better down the line. What you didn't get now is for a reason, and you're going to get something better in the future. So for me, I didn't quickly realize I was on the cornerstone, but I did realize that over time that it's okay not to get certain things and realize that the agency is not all about you all the time. They're about accomplishing whatever big picture mission they have to do.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, it sounds like a lot of times in what you're saying, it's we we feel like, the agency let us down, or they led us on to think we were something that we weren't. And in many cases, it's not that we weren't something, it's that the 30,000-foot view of an entire department or a unit or whatever, group you're a part of, there's some things that you just aren't going to know. And as I've been maturing in positions and with different units and different groups, it's understanding, like, first, when I'm frustrated, one of the immediate things that I've learned is to be like, what don't I know about this situation?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than the ego driven, well, I know what's best for this situation,
Mm-hmm.
is what I like to think, because then it's easier to point fingers at folks, and it's easier to
Right.
prop myself up, and it's easier to make myself feel better rather than pausing, stepping back, and saying, okay, I don't agree with this decision. I don't like this decision, but what do I not know about this decision that was made? And maybe it was personal. Maybe it was a shot at me. But you know what? Then you got to dig deep and you got to drive harder and find something different. But in many cases, there was something that caused the decision to be made that wasn't
Right.
personal, and man, that's hard to swallow, because it's a lot easier to get mad at somebody in the moment, but
Yeah,
it really
definitely.
doesn't serve anybody really
Yeah.
well, and that drives that negativity loop that we
Mhm.
see constantly,
Correct.
not just in law enforcement. I mean, man, before I do what I do now, I was in education, and it's just like it's everywhere. That pervasive negative attitude towards
Mhm.
things that isn't serving anybody.
Yeah, and it doesn't. It's a mindset that's not necessary. It's having a fixed mindset versus a
Mm,
growth mindset.
there you
And
go.
that's where sometimes we get caught up in the moment of our feelings. Like it's okay to wear your feelings on your shoulder. It's really okay, but it's also to have some logic that goes with it. Like you got to understand that everything happens, and if you're not the direct decision maker of whatever you're trying to do, then it may not go your way,
Hmm.
and that's okay. It doesn't have to go your way, but you have to continue to be who you are. You have to continue to develop yourself. And back then, well, that specifically in that situation, I did not develop myself like I should have. I allowed anger, I allowed animosity, I allowed feelings of being let down to overshadow some of my thoughts. And I can tell you, if I had a stronger mindset back then, I may still be with that agency right now. You know what I mean? Because I can see, I can honestly say that that decision really threw me off. Like it was one of those that I know if I would have gotten the position, that I would have stayed longer. But if I also would have had a better mindset, I would have said, you know what? What's next? What else can I do there? But
Mm,
life happens,
sure.
experiences happen. I would not be standing here today because that was in Florida. I'm in Texas now, so I can tell you right now, Steve, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation in this particular setting. So I'm happy things happen the way they do because we grow from them. But that came with maturity and time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for
Mhm.
sure. And it doesn't mean that, we should just be, I think, satisfied with that bad decision or that
Mhm.
anger as you reflect on things, knowing that, hey, e- every step of the way, those decisions do matter, and they do impact trajectory. And the proper growth mindset is to understand how we learn from them, but knowing that in the moment it may have propped or put you in a different position. And we don't know those things. We speculate about those things, but I
Mhm.
think that's part of why we're even doing what we're doing here, is to sit and talk about our experiences and things we've seen in an effort that somebody within earshot of this conversation might say, hey, I'm going through something similar to that, and what additional perspective do I need to apply in this moment? So, man, that's good stuff. Well, dude, we already dove right into it, but we got to
Let's keep
pause a
going.
minute. I know we got to pause a minute, and I want to hear a little bit about your background and growing up, because I mean, like you've already kind of laid out for us, you didn't always have this mindset that you have now, but apparently along the way there were some foundational things, or maybe some folks along the way that set you up, or
Mhm.
some things that happened that maybe you weren't aware of in the past that now you can reflect back on and say, man, that really helped set the course. So take us back. Where'd you
Okay.
grow up? What kind of influences did you have in your life? Your parents, siblings? I'm really curious, because the man you are today, definitely there's probably some past that played a role in who you are now. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, and I want people to understand that when I tell my background, my upbringing was not violent. It was not horrible. It wasn't something that I stay awake up. I stay awake right now thinking about, because I was blessed enough to have a very loving family. My
Mm,
mother, my grandmother, who raised me, they did everything they could. I didn't grow up with a father figure. We didn't grow up with a man in the house, but we grew up with people believing in what you're going to do. So for
yeah.
me, that was a big benefit to a lot of things I do now, because even when I face adversity, I have belief in myself, because that's how I was raised. So for me, growing up in Miami, Florida, raised by a single mother, a handicapped grandmother, it was loving wise, it was easy. Financially, it was tough. We
Mm,
moved a lot, almost once a year. I went to multiple schools. There was times when we didn't have anywhere to go. We were essentially homeless. We were sleeping on couches. For years, a dresser to me was a trash bag. You know, those big black trash bags that we put leaves in, and put
yeah.
that to me, I thought that was normal, because I grew up from like preteen to teenager, literally living out of trash bags. We would stay with other people, and then electricity will go out. I knew how to boil water to make hot water. So I think a lot of things that happened to me early on was it put me in kind of like a survival type mode. So
Sure.
when I started to accomplish a few things, like I was always like, just thank goodness I have this. I'm just happy to be content. So when I got my first job, it was actually at KFC slash Taco Bell. They still have those around, and I drive an hour a day to work after school, and I was just happy to work. Then I got a second job working at Blockbuster Video. And if anybody doesn't know what Blockbuster Video is, it's guys like Steve and I know, but they've been gone for about 15 years. I will tell you, Steve, that I was speaking in Oregon in December of last year, in 2022, and I did stop by that Blockbuster. They still have a Blockbuster out there. So in Bend,
That's
Oregon, they
awesome.
still do. So if you are a movie buff, or you just want to see if there's really such thing as a Blockbuster, go fly into Redmond,
There it
Oregon,
is.
drive about an hour south, and you will find a Blockbuster in Bend. And it's really there. I took a photo and everything. Like, I was so excited. I was like, oh, this is cool. Now
Yeah,
I didn't go inside,
stepping
but there
back.
were people inside. So yeah, so for me, Steve, so that was me growing up. And during that time, I did, even as a teenager, I think, and well, now I know now, one of the things that impacted me was my mother suffered from depression.
Mm,
So she suffered from depression so much that she was hospitalized multiple times because she tried to kill herself. So for me, when I started looking at mental wellness and I started to pay attention to that as well, I thought back to how I felt as a kid. I felt helpless as a kid because I could do nothing for her. Mind you, my sister was gone to college. So it was just me and her in the household. So when she got hospitalized, I had to figure out how to get to and from school. I had to figure out how to get to and from work. I had to do my homework on its own. And I think about the families that are going through this. When you have someone in your family that has depression, or you have it, it's more than one person that gets impacted. So for me, once again, I was putting myself in survival mode, just trying to get through that situation. I remember one time going to a church, well, the church I was going to, Northwest Christian Academy, and I was so broken down that after the service, I just went up to the pastor and started crying, because I was like, Mr. Chase, I just don't know what to do. I can't do anything. My mother's in the hospital. I'm helpless. What can I do? And I
mm,
remember those feelings because I think about people that have family members that are in the hospital now. How are they feeling? So for me, once again, I was in that survival mode, just trying to make it through. So my mother gets out of the hospital. Thank goodness she does great today. She doesn't have those kind of depressive states anymore. But I could tell, obviously, she still takes medicine here and there to kind of keep it together.
Sure.
But as I grew older, graduated high school, and I'm going to Florida State University. And about a year and a half into it, my sister was a dispatcher for the Tallahassee Police Department. So she came home one day with an application and said, "Hey, look, they're hiring. You qualify." And I was like, "Yes, I do qualify. Let me apply and see what happens." I was 19 years old. I remember we were living at 1702 West Call Street in Tallahassee, Florida. I was still working at Blockbuster because I transferred from when I was in Miami, and I transferred my store location to Tallahassee. And I was like, you know what? Worst case scenario, they tell me no. Best case scenario, they tell me you're hired. So in the summer of 2004, I applied. By December of 2004, I got that phone call saying, "Congratulations, you're hired. You start the academy in January of 05." So for me, my law enforcement career started extremely young. But even then, I was still in the survival mode mindset. I was taking things as they came to me. Someone may say, "Well, that seemed kind of proactive." I was like, "Well, not really. My sister brought me the application. I filled it out. It wasn't like I was out there hunting for a job. I was just, you know what? Somebody brought it to me and I accepted it." So I continued on this same survival type mindset. Got through the academy, of course. Went through FTO, became an FTO over some point. Did some special response team, and then things happened where I was like, you know what? I want more, but I don't really know. So I thought I was going to be in the FBI. Come to find out, they don't take people with just bachelor's degree and police officer experience. They want a lot more. They want people with an accounting degree, engineering degree. They want some kind of specialty, guys. So if you're looking at joining the FBI and you're like, you know what? My professor told me that after 4 years, I'm going to be eligible. Your professor's lying to you. So just to let you know. Or if you're like, you know what? I've been a police officer for 8 years.
Pro tip.
I've worked with the FBI. That's still not going to get you in, guys. Just let you know. You're going to need some kind of specialty, a law degree, something. That's just the way it is, realistically. So the next thing I took up that I saw they were just hiring was Border Patrol. So I applied for Border Patrol and actually got that. So I spent about 4 years in Laredo, Texas, which was amazing experience. I was a canine handler. I was on another special response teams prior to that. And then my son was born. So we were from Florida, and now we're living in Texas by ourselves with a brand new baby. And it was like, okay, it's time to shift. I need to go back to where our family's at. So at that time, I didn't know what a Federal Bureau of Prisons was, which is the federal corrections in the nation. They're the largest, maybe outside of California, the largest correctional institution in the U.S. So one of my buddies was a marshal. He was like, "Hey, you know what? There's this place I used to work for, the Bureau of Prisons. They're federal. Why don't you put in for them?" So I applied. 3 months later, I got hired. So I actually went from being a police officer to a Border Patrol agent to now a correctional officer. Now, for most people that are listening, most times you start off as a county jailer or you start in the prisons, then you get deputized or you get your you go through the academy, then you become a police officer. I did it backwards. I understand. It's how life took us, which was fine.
Sure.
Because it was part of the decision. So then I did my time as a correctional officer. I became an investigator, became a lieutenant. I ran an internal affairs department. I ran a training department. And all these different things were still kind of like survival mode type positions because I was just kind of applying for them because I thought it was time. And it wasn't until about 2021 where I looked at everything going on in my life. I looked at everything going on in our industry, and I was like, I got to do more. I was like, Steve, I have this gift, and I'm not using it like I should. At the time, 2021, I had already had my business that I have now, but I was really focused on leadership, and I actually stopped doing it for almost 2 years, not because of the pandemic or nothing like that. That did impact it, but I was just like, I was lazy. Let's just call it that. That's the best word I'm gonna use. I was lazy. So I was literally sitting in the house I'm in now. I was just like, what am I doing? Like, why am I not using this gift that God gave me to go speak? Why am I not using the skill I've been working on to keep building? So I started to look at where I was at in life. And then once again, that's when it hit me. I was like, I've had this almost fixed mindset for 35 years. I've been literally just sitting like on this gift and not pushing myself. I wasn't thinking about the big picture of all the things that I can impact. So at that time, I wasn't doing any speaking engagements just because I wasn't looking for them. So eventually I got with a company. They showed me how to market. And then in 2022, I had about 15 to 16 speaking gigs from going from 0 to prior 2 years. And now this year I've had nearly 10 already with another 5 or 6 on deck. And
awesome.
for the person that speaks a lot. That's not a lot, but I still have a full-time job. So I do the full-time job like you, Steve, and I
Yep.
do the speaking, the podcast, and YouTube. But all of everything I talk about, I look back to my upbringing and I look back
Mm,
to how just having a job was satisfactory to me. And it left me in a position where I had a fixed mindset and I was just on survival mode, not knowing it because I was getting promotions, but not like I should have. I was
mm,
making differences, but not like I do now. So for me, I've changed a lot. And it came to just focusing on myself and realizing that for me to be the best father, for me to be the best spouse, for me to be the best um, person, the sibling, I have to be good with myself. To be the best employee, I have to be good with myself. So that's kind of my career,
yeah.
especially professionally in a nutshell. But it kind of gives you an idea of where I started. And there's other stories in there and other situations, but truly, I can remember just some of the upbringing I had. And I wouldn't trade it for the world at this point because it's taught me a lot. That is it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to add anything else to it. That's crazy. So I will tell you that. I don't want anything that's gonna, I don't need any big. I heard people who have some really horrible stories. All of you folks that have your stories that bad things happen, I'm sorry. I don't want to go through them. Please keep telling them so we can avoid things like that happening to us.
Sure. Yeah, no, what we gain from people willing to be courageous and share things that have
Yeah.
happened, I mean, it does go to inform how we can move forward, just individually and as a group.
Mhm.
What was, excuse me, what was your, or did you see as your role amongst your peer groups as a child with what you were dealing with at times homelessness or financial things and being the man of the house? It sounds like, please correct me if I'm
Yeah.
putting words in your
Yeah. You're
mouth at
right.
all.
No, you're right.
um,
You're right. 100%.
because that was a role that you had to step into in some sense. I guess one, did you feel that in your home where it's like, hey, I have this obligation as a man, or were there other influences, male influences, because your father wasn't around, and how you kind of had to step into those roles? Because look, that's an early on leadership role, whether you wanted it or not. You
Right.
had to take, and whether you did it well or did it poorly,
Yeah. It was
you
there.
that was something that was put on
Mhm.
you very early in life. And I'm just curious kind of how you handled that role, even though maybe you weren't supposed to have it at that time.
For me, I was fortunate in the sense of there was nobody younger than me in my house, so I was always the youngest.
Okay.
So when it came to responsibility, it was almost like I only had to take care of myself. I didn't have any siblings. Like my sister had gone to college, and it was just me and my mother in the house for the longest. We had our grandmother in and out of our house, here and there, but I never really remember the pressures on that side because I don't think I paid attention enough. I mean, besides, especially because once I turned 16, I always had a job. So
Mm,
between school and work, it was nonstop. The only time I was thinking about anything was when I was driving an hour to work. Like outside of that, like Stephen, people realize that what I look back at was I wasn't responsible for anybody else besides myself in the house. Now, if I did have any younger siblings or any younger families, then I can see me realizing the role I was in.
mhm.
But for me, I really didn't think about it. My job was just, hey, I'm going to work to make money. I'm going to work because I need to eat. I'm going to work because I don't want my mother feeling like she has to go to work to support me. Now,
Mm,
I wasn't making enough to pay for a rent. I wasn't making enough to buy everybody meals, but I was enough to help myself survive. So the checks I got, a couple of $100 every couple of weeks, she never had to worry about taking care of me. And that was my main focus. Like I was like, what
interesting.
stress can I take off of my mother? So
Yeah.
when I look back at that, there was pressures. Actually, when we talk about it now, there was pressures to have that leadership role to run the house. But in my house, there really wasn't anybody there besides us two. So I didn't really feel the pressure at that time because I had no additional responsibilities that I had to take care of.
Sure, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, even hearing you say that, like that were you in where you're at today, I hear so much self awareness about what you're stepping into, what you are trying to understand about yourself, and even the roles that you've held through different agencies. At that time, And it's common with children to be like, hey, this is just everyday life. We do it. There's not a whole lot of self reflection. It's just you go into every day. But
Mhm.
were there moments where you were very aware back then, or is that a skill you had to learn to sit and understand what role you actually have in any given situation?
For me, it's a skill that I had to acquire or at
Mm,
least recognize. I never, like when I was growing up, when I moved away to college and I was living on my own, when I became a police officer, when I was starting a family, I never really had the awareness of what I was doing. I didn't understand how important some of the decisions I was making would lead to others. Now, that doesn't mean I made bad decisions or purposely trying to make them, but I didn't really
sure.
sit there like I do now. Like I think like, okay, if I make this decision, what else can happen?
Mm,
It's not gonna mean it's gonna stop me, but it's gonna at least help me prepare for what can come. So even for me back then, I had no buddy. I didn't really have any real mentors growing up. I didn't have people that
mm,
were like, hey, Michael, this is how you should be moving as a man. This is how you should be
sure.
moving as a father. Because my father, once again, wasn't in my life. Even today, he's not in my life. Um, Now I do have other male role models that I've learned to go acquire. Like
Hmm.
I've found mentors, and I tell people that if you don't have a mentor, go get one on your own. I have done that, and it's impacted my life so much because I thought someone would just come and tell me what to do or give me the advice to be a better person, and it doesn't really work like that. What you hear on Steve's podcast is us trying to give you the advice, but normally there's nobody that's just going to typically, on average, I can tell you at least my experience. No one's just going to say, "Hey, we want you to be a better person," and then give you tools to do it. You have to go out there and get the tools yourself. You have to go find people that are positive and learn from them and grow from them. So, Steve, for me, I didn't know that. It literally took me 30 plus years to develop that skill set. And now, since I have it, I look back at these situations, like I mentioned earlier with the story with the captain, and I reflect on these and say, you know what? I could have probably made a better decision. You know what? I could have probably handled that a little differently, but it's because I didn't know any better and
Hmm.
not giving myself a pass. But if I would have known better, I would have made different decisions. But it's okay. That's part of life. Nothing crazy happened. Thank God nothing crazy happened. But as we go forward, and I think about like making self-reflection and that skill, it is something that if you're not taught it, meaning that you don't go look for it to get the material, I don't think it's a natural thing for anybody. And that's why I stress it. I can even tell you, Steve, 3 agencies. I've been in 3 different agencies right now. I've lived in multiple states. I've had multiple promotions, and I don't. And I can't even say I don't recall. I know I have not gotten any self-awareness training. Not especially nothing that was required by the agency.
Mm.
So for me, that's why it's been one of my missions to kind of push that because I know it's not a natural skill typically, and unless someone teaches it to you, you won't really know it. So for me, growing up and looking back, I did not have that skill. It was something I had to develop over time.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Where did the communication aspect come in? Where did your ability to speak, to articulate points? Where would you, if you had to go back and give some credit, where did that come from? In terms of even writing, communicating, as we're the larger umbrella that I feel around this conversation is even helping that 16 to 21-year old right now. I feel like that is a niche of even
Absolutely.
what we're talking about right now because we're giving that wisdom hopefully to them in that moment. And I often tell kids when they say, hey, what should I focus on? What should I do? Be a communicator. If I tell you right now, if I become a better writer and a better speaker and
Mhm.
the ability to take a point and concisely um, lay it out for someone in a way that they can understand by understanding their personality and their strengths, the sky's the limit because I see that communication aspect, not only because of all the social media and Gen
Mhm.
Z, and not just because of that, but there's a lot of weak communicators even in our generation that
Mhm.
didn't
Yeah.
have the social
Yeah.
media part. And so that's one of the biggest skill sets that I think we can lay out there. So for yourself, where do you think you arrived at acquiring some of those skills?
Well, I can tell you, Steve, and I know people don't believe it, but it's very true. I'm an introvert by nature. The extrovert you see is trained. This is meaning that not saying it's not genuine, but I had to grow up this skill set to be able to come speak on a podcast. I had to grow the skill set to go be a keynote speaker, to go host 8-hour day seminars. It wasn't like something that I just woke up knowing how to do, or it wasn't something that someone pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, we think you should start doing it." I could tell you when I was in college, for anybody that's been in college, in every undergraduate degree, typically you have to have some kind of public speaking class. Just that's one class that they require you. I feared public speaking so much that I took an interviewing class. That was the one class I took, and that satisfied that 3-hour requirement I had to have some kind of public speaking. So I'll tell you right now, it wasn't that I gained it because a degree required it. It's because I realized something when I was about 29, 30. I earned a promotion to a lieutenant. And one thing I realized what the lieutenants were doing that I saw, they were doing a lot of communicating. They were doing roll calls. They were presenting briefings. They were doing 3 and 4 hour training classes. And I knew in my mind that was what I was going to start doing because all of them had to do it. And I seen some good ones and I seen some bad ones. And I didn't want to be on the bad one side. I wanted to be on the good one side. So I can tell you that I had to think about what I can do. So around that time, it was very coincidental. I heard about something called Toastmasters. Toastmasters International. It's a educational organization that's international. They focus on public speaking and leadership. So anybody looking to increase their public speaking skills, you can go to toastmasters.org, type in your zip code or where it says find yourself a club and go do it. I don't make money from them. They don't pay. I don't have any logos around that you see. But for me, that group of people they're the ones that enhance my speaking abilities. So I started doing that in February of 2016, shortly after I became a lieutenant. And as I started to do that, I was like, you know what, Steve? I actually like this whole public speaking thing. It's not that nerve-wracking as I previously thought. Now, mind you, when I started in Toastmasters, I said this was in 2016. I became a police officer in 2005. I already had 10 years of communicating. But just because you could talk to suspects or you could talk to persons of interest, doesn't mean you're a good speaker. So let me clarify that. Doesn't necessarily mean you're a good communicator. You may be able to extract information, but can you deliver that information to a group of people? Can you deliver in a way that they understand and retain? So for me, I joined Toastmasters in February 2016. They taught me all the little things about speaking that I would never have known. And now when I see people speak and it's something I try not to do, I'm looking at how they speak. I'm looking at how they move, how they enunciate their words, if they use am, so. And I could tell people that have trained to themselves as speakers, I can tell people that haven't. If you're 16 to 21, there's Toastmasters Club that you can start doing at 18. Some areas have what they call gavel clubs that you can do as a teenager. But if you're looking for something that's going to enhance your communication skills in a very good environment, that's what I recommend to people because I can tell you it worked for me. I actually stopped doing it for a few years because I just got tied up on doing other things. But this past summer, someone was like, hey, can you help us start another club in the Beaumont area? So I came out of retirement, so to speak, to help out. But I can tell you, Steve, even that, like the group of people that's doing it, they want to be there. Toastmasters is a group of people and they're not any certain set of people. It's not like you're going to be, you're going to be people from the PD or people from the sheriff's office, people from the community college. It's people from all walks of life that just want to be better and they want you to be better. So February 2016, I started that. Then I realized how much I liked what I was doing. And then it was the winter of 2017. A guy that I used to be a coworker with for Border Patrol, he was doing something with this John Maxwell team. And I was like, well, what is this John Maxwell team? So I reached out to him. He gave me the link. After that, you get on a phone call with somebody. They sell this great picture of what this is. And I ended up joining the John Maxwell team where I got certified to be a coach, speaker, and trainer. And that is what elevated me to having the confidence to having a speaking business. And since then, that's why I've had a speaking business since October of 17. Mind you, nowhere in my life before that did I like to speak. In high school, I wasn't in no debate clubs, which I wish I would have now because I didn't realize how great those was. I wasn't in any kind of reading clubs. I know we think these are for nerds, but nerds are people that communicate well, guys. So you know what I mean, guys? Like as you get older, you start to say, man, I wasted time in my life. I just wanted to watch NBA basketball and play video games. That was cool to me. But really, when we talk about communication skills, especially being able to deliver information in the right way, Steve, it's about building yourself up to that level, because some of us are naturally decent communicators, but none of us are great communicators.
Mm,
Everybody that I will tell you right now, everybody that you think is a good communicator, you go deeper into their history and they've had some kind of training somewhere. They're not just magically good. And this ain't a political statement, but like Barack Obama, amazing speaker.
absolutely.
People don't realize he was a lawyer before that, or law school. He went to law school, and he worked on his presentations. So every time you hear him use a certain word or move in a certain way, it's all because he trained to do that. Any
Yeah.
speaker you hear now, all these folks have been trained to be good speakers and good communicators. So when you're looking at what you could do young, and I wish I would have done this at 16. I wish I would have worked on this, because communicating, being a good speaker, being able to deliver information in a way that people can comprehend is invaluable. You will be a part of so many different positive circles that you won't be able to see straight, because people are like, man, I could tell you, once I learned the speaking skill, the agency I was working for, they're like, hey, we want you to come speak. Like, it took about a year or two from them to realize it, but once that happened, they're like, hey, I don't have to force presentations. I don't have to force myself speaking. People call me and say, Michael, hey, we want you to come speak to these group of officers. It's because I've worked on the skill set. 10 years
Sure.
ago, I wouldn't get these phone calls. I would have to make some of these phone calls. And when I say that, I say it within your own organization or whatever you decide to do. Working on your communication skills goes so far, because you're impacting people through words and information that you believe in. So yeah, Steve, I would say for that person that's 16 to 21, Toastmasters is something I would recommend they
That's
get in,
awesome. Yeah.
because it's inexpensive.
Right on, man. No, a practical tip like that is so important. And look, you got to be a little bit courageous to step into something like that, because it can feel overwhelming. It can be overwhelming, but in many cases, organizations like you're bringing up with Toastmasters and other organizations, there are going to be people equipped and prepared to welcome you into something like that, to
Mm-hmm.
walk you through it, right? It's not just about
Yep.
being thrown to the wolves. A great organization is going to walk you through step by step, understand what you're coming in, that kind of those prerequisites, those aptitudes you have, and then develop them well. And so that's really cool. You had that exposure to something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and it shows, and it's obvious, and for you to be able to even give credit to that and recognize the credit to that is really important, as well as we need to do with anything that propels us along the way. So no,
Right.
fantastic point in terms of communication. But let's shift gears slightly. I want to kind of dive into some of the stuff that you're learning about as you speak and as you deliver things. But we've danced around it a little bit, and when we're talking about leadership, an area that I see, not in just my own agency, but in other agencies, in organizations, as I'm out speaking in the community and dealing with civilians, is this idea, which is a long old leadership idea, of the manager versus the leader. And in times of desperation, in times of shortages and officer shortages, in times of dealing with increase in call volume, increase of crime, increase of problems within an organization or agency, we tend to have to default to management to get through, and we're not falling on leadership, which ultimately I think is going to do the greater good. So, would you talk a little bit about that, if you could, just in maybe, I don't know if that comes up in kind of the circles and things you talk about, but in really differentiating this leadership management model, and maybe some things that you're seeing that would be helpful for those that maybe are experiencing it and exposed to that, and they don't know how to identify if they're being managed or if they're being led.
Correct. So one of the things that so when I started speaking again, I crafted different presentations based on the environment, based on what I need to do. And one of the things I came out with was I started talking about like employee engagement, employee satisfaction. But there was one part of my presentation I talked about retention.
Hmm.
And through trial and error, I realized that after my presentations, people continue to ask about retention. So I took a deeper dive into it. And if you don't realize, I did not say recruitment. I'm literally emphasizing retention, because to me, it's more important to train the people that you have versus keep trying to find random people to show up. You know what I mean? Because we'll give 15,000, 10,000, $25,000 for recruitment incentives, but then we get them and we can't keep them. It's because our retention strategies are what struggle. And one of the things that I've realized is that people don't have succession planning in place. And that to me comes from leadership. Because as a leader, you should have both. You should know how to manage and lead. Because there is a difference. When you manage, you're looking at people's payroll, you're looking at the budget, you're looking at people's schedules, trying to divvy out workload.
Mm-hmm.
But as a leader, you're there to motivate people, find ways to build them up, encourage them. And you have to have both. Like, you can't just be a manager, because that's how you lose people. You can't just be a leader, because then you don't have any organization. So you have to have both, but there is a difference. So if you're wondering, well, I feel like I'm being micromanaged. Well, go back to, why are you being micromanaged? Is it a you thing, or is it that person's thing? Or is it something that they've been through? Because I've learned that people that micromanage, something's happened to them in the past. Not saying anything really bad, but they were hemmed up because maybe they had more of a non-micromanaged style before. Maybe they had like a less Ferris type style where they weren't always on the person, but they let them do it and then they got burned. So when you start looking at different styles, if you're like, well, I want a leader, are you a good follower? Can you handle a good leader? Because sometimes I've seen some very charismatic leaders, and those followers don't know what to do because that leader's too much vision. They're like, oh, then you start hearing people say, oh, we can't do that. Why can't you do that? Do you want a manager or a leader? So for me, when I look at the differences between the two, I do believe you have to have both, but a manager is more about tasks versus people, and the leader is more about people versus tasks. But you can't say, oh, we're going to skip the calls for service, because you got to go do those. You got to do the homicide cases. You got to manage the budget. You have to have that, but you do have to have people inspired. So one of the things that I really started to press on lately, and it's one of my presentations, they call Foolproof. And what it's designed to do is look at retention. It's designed to look at trust. It's designed to look at generational awareness. It's designed to look at succession planning, because only about 24% of organizations successfully do succession planning. I don't really believe the 24% is true. I feel like it's a lot lower, but there was a study that was done that said 24% of organizations that have it implemented. So let's say 1 out of 4 agencies do it. People, especially millennials, which make up 35% of the workforce right now, want some type of leadership program. 87% of them say that they want something. So when you're looking back at retention, what are you doing to have people stay with you? What are you designing to have people buy into the culture? If you're growing and training them on things that aren't normal, such as firearms or defensive driving, report writing, then you're going to keep them. They expect you to do those 3 things. Like, that's a part of the job. You have to do those 3. But are you growing them as a person? So that comes with leadership. I stay away from the manager side on that, but you have to have that kind of inspiration to kind of build people. But you need leadership or you need a manager to organize the program. So for me, when you start looking at both of them, you can't have one without the other. But if you want to be a better leader, you have to start learning how to look at the big picture. You have to learn how to trust your people. You have to have ways to build them up, because if you want them to grow, you have to give them the tools. Because if not, you're going to fall back and you're going to be a manager. If your department or your squad or the team you're on is not performing, you're going to have a manager. I can tell you right now, I've had great teams, and I tell my team all the time, I said I could be the best leader or the best micromanager. I don't want to be a micromanager, but if we're not performing, I have to be that. And once again, if you have someone that's a micromanager, if you can, and I'm not saying that door is open, go ask him or her, hey, what kind of style do you have in leadership? Like, because I feel like you're always watching us, or you're making sure, and that person's probably going to tell you, well, I allowed this to happen before, and I don't want to see this happen. Or I heard this happen to this other manager, and now I'm nervous. So you got to realize that there's reasons for everything. Empathy is an important part for you to have too, because as a follower, you have to understand that people have gone through things just like you. And I could tell you, I have friends that are great leaders. I have friends that are great micromanagers. So, but I understand where they get their micromanagement from too, because we've talked about. I'm like, hey, how's your style like this? And once again, for you to have that conversation with your leader, you have to be self-aware and confident in yourself. You got to be able to go to them in a respectful way and know how to communicate
Yep.
what you're trying to ask them. Because if you're confrontational, what do you think you're going to get? So everything does come back down to communication. But when you're looking at leader versus manager, it's a matter of style. Both styles work. Obviously, both styles are needed. You just have to understand where you fit, where the leader fits that's in front of you. And I think once you analyze both sides, you'll be able to see which one and why they're doing the way they do things.
Yeah. Well, and what I hear in that is, to paraphrase a little bit, is that development of the coworker, the employee, the subordinate, whatever role is there, is most important. And I think that goes back to that retention thing, what we even started with when we were talking today. When someone feels that they're being developed, that
Mm-hmm.
adds a lot of meaning
Yes.
to what they're doing, because then they want to go execute and they want to perform on what they're learning. And that execution is what I think creates meaning, whether it's having satisfaction or whether it's having success within whatever role or function you are actually doing. And so, but what's interesting is, and you said it, that starts with communicating. What is
Mm-hmm.
my role? What is my job? What is my style? What is my personality? What are my aptitudes? What are my attributes that I bring to the table? And what skills am I willing to let you help me
Mm-hmm.
develop, whether that's send me to training or whether that's speak hard things to me.
Yeah.
And that all comes back to that ability to communicate and show empathy, and not just fly off the handle because someone didn't actually get the job done as they were supposed to, because that's a default, especially in our world,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
And let me add real quick, Steve. And once again, and you guys think about micromanagers, and we're going to use that term loosely. Um,
Sure.
you're going to learn from that person too. You're going to learn about organization. You're going to learn about CYA. And if you don't know what CYA is, go Google it. You'll come up with a few different answers. And you're going to learn about priority. You're going to learn about all that with a micromanager. So don't just take that experience as a negative, or because I know sometimes when you hear the word micromanager, sometimes you get like that cringing feeling like,
Hmm.
I really don't want that person, but they're going to teach you something. Like I said, one of my friends, he's just retiring as a warden right now. He was a big micromanager. To this day, we are great friends. I'm going to go speak at his retirement, but he taught me things. He taught me about paying attention to the details.
Mm.
Sometimes with leadership, very charismatic leaders, sometimes you miss the detail. And that's written in books and other people talk about that. But being around people that micromanage, you're going to learn from something. You're going to learn something from them as well.
Yeah. Well, and that micromanager, there's that progression, because a lot of times when you're training someone or someone's new to a
Mhm.
role, you're going to lay things out a lot more
Yes.
specifically, let's say, in as they're learning what their
Correct.
role is, and the expectation, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
setting expectations takes that level of micromanagement because you're
Correct.
setting the standard. And
Right.
but it's, does that person, that leader, that manager, that supervisor, do they know how to start to pull back and give
Mhm.
responsibility over,
Right.
and realizing they're ultimately still responsible if that person
Mhm.
fails? However, that they start to pull back, and because we all like to feel like, hey, I'm
Mhm.
carrying a little responsibility, whether I'm a supervisor or not. It feels
Correct.
good to be like, hey, I had an important role to play in this operation, or this specific task that was
Right.
given, and to lay that out. No, that's a really valuable point,
Yeah.
for
And
sure.
that's one of the first things I talk about when it comes to people that are like emerging leaders, or they're a sergeant or a corporal, they're in their first leadership role. One of the very first things I teach them is delegation. You know what I mean?
It's
Because
hard. It's
you
hard.
can't. Hey, see, anybody, and I know. I think in your role, you were first level or second level.
So, second level.
Second one. So that first level, when you were that top-notch detective, and then
Hmm.
you went and now you were the supervisor, sergeant over that whole squad, it was tough. It's tough for all of us, guys. It's tough to give away knowing every single detail of what's going on. But the power of delegation is what I teach people early on in their supervisory career, because that's what's going to burn you out. Another thing that's going to burn you out is feedback, but that's another story in itself. But being able to get feedback, that's a tough one too. But delegating, realize you can't do it all. You have a team because that's the design. If you might have a squad of 5, you may have a squad of 10, 15, but it's now their responsibility to do certain work that you don't have to do. You can't do it all. If they wanted you to do everything, you wouldn't have anybody else in your unit. So that's part of the process. So yeah, so that's one things I look at for new leaders. And sometimes I have to look at it for middle managers and CEOs because I'm like, let's revisit delegation. But that's usually one of the very first hurdles I see. One of the biggest hurdles I see when you go from being a non-supervisor to a supervisor is delegation.
Yeah, what are some, let's take that to the next level if you would for a minute. What are some of those suggestions, real practical, as people recognize that, hey, I need to give up some of these responsibilities and I need to delegate. What are some things that you're going to instill in someone that's stepping into that role?
Well, first and foremost, to delegate, you have to know what you're doing. Let's call it what it is. And you have to make sure they know what they're doing. So before you give someone a task, you have to first know it yourself. Then you have to teach it to them. Then you have to observe them doing, and then you just let them do it. So usually there's a 4-step process that I like to teach delegation. Make sure you know what you're doing with it. So if you want to tell them to write a traffic ticket, for example, make sure you know how to write a traffic ticket. If you haven't written one in 10 years, you better go figure out how. You're going to have to learn it. Oh, so okay, now you know it. Now you teach it to them. Make sure they know. Go through line by line of that ticket. Make sure they know to write the name in there. Make sure they know to write the offense in there. Make sure they sign it. Make sure they do all of that. Second or third, watch them do it. Observe them. Make sure that they comprehended what you said. Because if you just send them out there not knowing that they knew, you're going to be confused and they're probably going to fail. And then finally, you just got to give them experience to do it once you realize they can do it. So usually those are the 4 steps I look at when it comes to delegation is learn it yourself, teach it, observe it, allow them to do it. It's kind of like the FTO process or field training officer process for most people. It's the same thing because think about it. If you're an FTO or if you more than likely you've been in some kind of FTO process, you were first showed by someone with the experience how to do a traffic crash properly, how to do a traffic stop properly. More than likely, and if they have it, please let Steve know. He'll come teach your agency. I'm just kidding. No. But hopefully they did the first traffic stop with. Hopefully they did the first one. And you saw how they approached from one side, and then you saw they approached from the passenger side. Then they told you what they did. Next, they observed you do it. Now they just know you can do it. So when it comes to being that leadership role, you have to take those same steps. And it's like, man, I never thought about it like that. But a lot of things we do are repeated behaviors of things that we've already learned. So you learn what you're supposed to, you teach it, you observe it, and then you allow them to do it. Now, if you're wondering if they can do it, let's say, well, Michael, I told him to go write 5 tickets. Measure it. Tell them to come bring you back those 5 tickets. All right, let me see what you did. And as you gain that confidence in them, you're not going to be over them as much. But what I find out in some roles, some situations, is that leader didn't teach that person. That's why they're not confident in them. And it's like, well, did you teach them what to do? Well, no, then they're not going to be successful. How can you expect someone to be successful if they don't have the right tools to succeed? So going back to teaching them, observing them, and then finding some way to measure whatever you're doing. And usually, once again, in law enforcement, the measurement, let's say for a ticket writing is seeing a ticket, doing a homicide report, reading the report after, that's kind of the measurement. If they do the 5 W's and make sure they sign it and put the evidence in there, hey, that's usually part of what you're looking for. But when it comes to delegation, it's the same thing. You have to train the people to be successful, and then that's when you can slowly let the reins go as they show you they can do it. And then you do it with your next person that's your next subordinate. You do it with the next one. But the only way you're going to do that is if you show them the ropes the first time. And at that first level supervisor, that's kind of your role, unless they already know it. But even if they know it already, go through the steps with them. Do a tabletop with them. Day A. Show me how you do. Show me how you patrol your zone. Just show me. I'm just curious. How do you patrol your zone? And they might say, well, I do this, I do that. And now you're confident they can do it. So part of delegation is learning what you need to, teaching, observing, and then finally measuring it, however you measure it.
Yeah, no, right on. Those are awesome tips. And one thing I learned along the way to expand on those four is a lot of times like we want to test and understand that they do know what they're doing
Hmm.
kind of before we set them loose on
Hmm.
that, because competence instills confidence. And when we do that, a tactic I find is get a third party and have that person you're instructing teach them,
Hmm.
because
Ooh,
we
yeah.
all know once you teach a skill, you're that's showing understanding of the process.
Hmm.
Back in my education days, everything when you're writing a lesson plan, when you're laying things out, it's all about understanding every step of the process, because typically a person that's not educating, they're making assumptions about prior knowledge, and the only way to get rid of those assumptions that or identify what steps
Hmm.
you're missing of the process is to have them teach it. So once you show them, once you teach them, once they do it, if they can go and then teach someone else what to do and you observe that instruction of them,
Hmm.
a lot of times you can identify quickly what that misstep is, or maybe something they might miss because they weren't thinking
Right.
of that process. And so I love how you laid out all of those steps really practically. That's instant, that someone in a supervisory role can take. So right on, though, that's fantastic.
Leadership is simple,
Solid.
Steve. Leadership very simple. I tell people don't overthink leadership. Like people will always want like sometimes they see my techniques and strategies like, well, I knew that, but you weren't doing it. Like we keep saying it's simple, but why didn't you simply do it? Why didn't you
Mm,
simply execute this? So sometimes just the simple things that we already do, we just have to package it in a different way. So yes, actually, Steve, you made a good point. The reason why I know so much I know about self awareness is because I teach it, I instruct it.
yeah.
And nobody wants to be standing in front of a group of a couple of hundred people and not know what you're talking about. So if you ever want to learn anything that you're passionate about, go teach it. Steve just told you guys that's how one another way to measure it. If they can teach it, trust me, they understand it.
There you go. And I mean, what's an expert? An expert is someone that can actually go and educate someone on a
Mhm.
topic, meaning they
Correct.
can teach it. They understand every nuance to it. And while someone may say, "Oh, I ain't trying to be an expert," it's like, well, you should be. Whether
Yeah.
you're the leading
Why not?
expert, you might not be the leading expert, but there's no reason that you can't be an expert ticket writer, or you can't be an
Mhm.
expert fill in the blank for your role at all. And that's going to show that high level of competence. That is a quality or and a characteristic that I look to in people that I want to work with is, man, like the competence that they are showing on a specific topic, whether they know everything, I'm not concerned about everything, but if they have that niche area that's like, that's my go-to person.
Yeah.
If I have a question, I'm going to them. And that's fantastic. So, oh man, like practical tools, I love it, man. That's phenomenal.
Keep it
Well,
simple.
look, I want to respect your time, but we haven't talked on something. So if you got a few more minutes, I'd like
Come on, let's do it.
all
Let's
right,
do it.
cool. Well,
Come on.
look, this where we started, we said something about this, but we haven't developed it and hashed it out. I want to talk a little bit about this wellness stuff,
Okay.
because man, I know you got some speaking stuff coming up around that, and you've been thinking of it. It's on your mind. I kind of want to let you freely riff on it, but one question I have is with thankfully, right now in first responder professions across the board, this is rising to the surface. Some by law. I know here in Maryland it's by law,
Mhm.
but it goes deeper than that, because there is a real need to understand self awareness and general maintenance of mental health. And then in some cases, not all, but in some cases where we need to triage pretty severe situations and we need to help people work through them. So, in what are you seeing right now as you're going out and speaking as an area that you're really honing in on and focusing on when it comes to wellness? Because it's a big, complex topic, and I'm curious, kind of what you're seeing and experiencing.
You know, Steve, when I came back to the speaking world, my book called Greatness Beyond the Badge is about self-awareness. And it does talk about mental wellness. And when I originally prepared it, it was called The Invisible Law Enforcement Officer. It was a title I came up with and made sense in my head. And when I first started presenting it back in early 22, I created in 21, it wasn't really it was sticking, but not to like executives like
Hmm.
chiefs, sheriffs. They weren't very interested in it. It's because we still wasn't really putting mental wellness, self-awareness on the forefront. And by the end of that year, 2022, all my speaking engagements, well, not all, let's just say 75% of my speaking engagements already this year has focused on my self-awareness presentation because the industry is taking such a strong hold on mental wellness. Obviously, our suicide rates are high. There's one study that I actually put in my Greatness Beyond the Badge program. It says that 54% of law enforcement officers are more likely to commit suicide than your average citizen. We go through a lot of traumas. Our mind deals with a lot. So I can see where the push is coming from, and it's consistently coming from everybody now. I spoke in Dubai back in March at the World Police Summit, and one of the things that they told me they were so dialed in on was officer wellness. They have a department called the Happy Department. Like literally, the Dubai police, they have a whole division. Like how you have a homicide division, they have a happy division because they're trying to build up officer wellness. They're trying to take it to that next level to allow people to realize how important you are to the industry. So for me, I have seen an amazing shift. When people call or ask about what I speak on, I say, well, what are you looking for? Self-awareness, mental wellness, or leadership? And even the executive level associations are now saying, you know what? We want your greatness beyond the badge presentation. So even in the last 18 months, I've seen a shift in how important this topic is. So for me, I'm happy I created my presentation when I did. I realized that I had that living room epiphany that, hey, I need to focus on like mental wellness because it's important. It's important to me. I told you guys earlier about what happened with my mother suffering through depression. Just like a lot of you that are watching or listening to this, you've had friends, brothers and sisters commit suicide, people in uniform that you know. And what I realized, there's just not enough. I was speaking to this correctional officer about 6 months ago. She had come through my training program about a year and a half before that. And every time someone comes through this 2-week program, we talk about EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. We talk about what it's designed for, the availability. And I end up talking to this particular officer. I actually got her confused with somebody else because her last name was Jones. And I thought I heard an incident had happened where an inmate came into the office and she had to like spray the inmate. And if you're a correctional officer, your office where you're at is pretty small. So just imagine inmates fighting and come in there, and now you have to spray everybody. So it was a pretty traumatic incident. Which it's back in the day that wasn't really traumatic, but now when we think about it, it's like, hey, that is kind of traumatic. You're not used to inmates. It's like an inmate or a suspect jumping in your cruiser and try to fight you. It's almost the same kind of thing to the correctional officer world. So the officer I thought she had went through that incident. So I was just going by talking to her, see how things are going. And then she was like, well, no, that wasn't me. But something else happened to her that prior week before. And then my first question was, well, have you talked to EAP about it? And she looked at me and she was like, I have no clue what EAP is. What that told me is, although I know she went to multiple classes up to that point that talked about it, it's still not enough out there. We're still not pushing this enough. There's not enough information that comes out about it. Not saying that anybody's wrong, but every day we think about stuff like this, we need to be pushing it. We still have, if people knew about all these amazing mental wellness organizations, speakers, programs we had out there, we wouldn't have none of this, or it would be very minimized because some mental illnesses you can't get around. That's life. The brain just functions. I'm not a psychologist or a doctor, but I can tell you what I read. The brain is just what the brain is. Sometimes chemical imbalances take over, but some of these can be avoided if the person had this information. So for me, that's why I love to speak about it. That's why I get so energetic about it, because I know what it can do. So back in March of 2019, I had a buddy named Ben Valle, and he committed suicide. And at the time, I had no answer for him. Today, if he was still here, one of the things I would do is I would say, hey, man, let's go read my book. Or I would just send him a copy of the book. Why? Because I believe if he knew who he was as a person and he realized whatever failures he had in his life going on, he would overcome them. He would have one more tool to at least think about that. So for me, mental wellness has been a big part of my life now. It's a big part of what I speak about. I don't talk about resiliency as much as others do. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a person that's been in this industry for 18 years. I've met a lot of great people. I've been around and I see what we don't have. And that's not, trust me, guys, I don't want you to ever think that I'm talking bad about anybody's agency, anybody's department, any part of law enforcement. But I do understand where the priorities are. Part of self-awareness is understanding your surroundings. As an agency, there's a mission they have to accomplish. You guys have to be aware of that. But you should have your own personal mission for your own health. You should have your own personal mission for what goes on in between your ears, because you're going to see really crappy things in your life. We've all seen that. I've had a baby die in my hands before. I've seen crappy things. But as I've gotten older, as I've gotten more educated, I realize that knowing who you are, why you should develop yourself, and how to kind of get there is as important as everything else we do. Because at whatever your retirement age is, you're going to leave your agency at some point. And when you leave, they're just going to move on to the next person. It's weird. I was talking to the what is he now? He was the I was talking to a retired Austin chief of police earlier today. You may know him, Brian Manley from Off Duty Management. You may
Yeah,
have.
I know the name.
Yeah, yeah. Me and him were just talking. He used to be the chief of police in Austin just a couple of years ago, and he was talking to me. He was like, "Yep, they already got a new chief already." He said, "It's crazy how that works." But you know what I mean? But we were like this. We were laughing about it because realistically, I want people to understand, if you leave your organization, they're going to replace you. It's just what it is. More than likely, the agency was there before you, and the agency is going to be there after you. But you have to have your mind right before you leave, because we go through so many traumas that a lot of us haven't been prepared. I'm happy, like states like Maryland, states like California, you're right, they're mandating stuff like this because they know what you're about to face in 25 to 30 years of law enforcement. They know how traumatic it's going to be. There was another study I heard, I don't know if it was from the DOJ or whoever, that talked about law enforcement officers have about 700 traumatic incidents or something like that throughout their career versus the average person that has 5. So you start looking at those numbers, your mind is getting beat up on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So as you look at growing, as you look at building, for me, self-awareness, that's where it's coming. That's for me, that's where it comes at. Understanding who you are as a person is so vital, because it's what's going to help you grow and get past these obstacles that you're going to face.
Yeah, for sure. And the different stages and the availability of tools out there, I mean, is great right now. Obviously, there's acute, specific bad incidents where people don't deal with well, and they need that intensive treatment, whether it's a psychiatrist, psychologist, a counselor. But in many cases, wellness comes down to fitness, to self-education, to self-awareness, to mentorship, to peer group conversations, to just sharing your feelings about what occurred. And I'm not talking about sitting in a chair and sobbing. I'm just talking about having companionship with someone that you can share that, hey, this was a tough thing that I dealt with today. And it may end right there, but the fact that you were able to release in that moment just that feeling that, hey, this did impact me. Not that I can't do my job, not that I can't take care of my kid tonight, not that I have suicidal ideations. It's just I need to just tell you that I'm a human and I experience something. And it doesn't always have to rise to where the stigma is of now I got to sit in the chair and tell everybody how I feel for 3 hours.
Hey,
And that's a
Steve,
tough
I'm gonna
thing to
tell you right
overcome.
now, I sit in a chair every 3 to 4 weeks by choice. I love that chair. I love going through account. Steve, I get off so much off my chest, and then
Mm.
she's just happy to hear me talking. She's giving me advice. Sometimes she's saying, "Pull your head out your butt."
Uh-huh.
Steve, I started counseling, being a patient, and I'm transparent because I've been doing it now for about 8 to 10 months, maybe a little bit longer, at least 8 months. I know for sure, and it's been transformational because I didn't want to just one of those person that talks about doing certain things. I wanted to be
Sure.
the person that practiced it and executed it.
Right
Because
on.
once again, as a leader, you lead by example. I
There you
don't
go.
want people to think that it's I'm just saying, oh, go talk to a counselor or a therapist. I do it myself, and I love it. I've loved the experience. I just talked to her yesterday. Today's Thursday. Yeah, Wednesday. I talked to her yesterday. We just talk about things going on in my life, and it's great to be able to go talk to somebody that's a completely neutral party
Mm.
because you're able to vent. Don't get me wrong, people love talking to their spouse. People love talking to their coworkers. Having a beer or two isn't that bad, but having 8 or 10 of them isn't going to solve whatever you have going on.
There's
Because there's
definitely
a
things that
point
will make
where
it
you,
worse.
yeah, yeah, and there's a point in there where you lose your like you lose your mindset somewhere in there. I don't know.
Sure.
Everybody has a different tolerance, but you all lose it. If you're at number 10, you all lost it. Trust
Yeah,
me. There's that.
yeah,
You're like, I got a
yeah.
strong tolerance. Yeah, go walk that line. Let's see how
That
good that.
might be counterproductive.
Correct. But yeah, but like for me, for example, like when I was going through my divorce, I had a tough time. This was back in 2017, 2018. First thing I went to was my pastor, and I love talking to my pastor about things. And even to this day, I still speak to him occasionally. We're not as close because I moved away, but having, like you said, just somebody to go talk to, vent, release what's going on is important. I mean, like neither of us are PhD certified psychologists, but I can tell you going to one, it works, guys. It works. And I can only tell you from my own experience. It's important to know how important it is to have help out there. You shouldn't face things alone. And I'm going to reference something that was kind of interesting. And I usually don't reference TV shows, but lately I've been watching the TV show called SWAT. Um, and I don't know if you guys seen it before, but it has Shamar Moore. He's the lead actor. He used to be on what is that? What is that? Not NCIS. He used to be on another show. Criminal Minds. He used to be one of the main characters, black guy. And one of the recent episodes that I saw in season 3 was they had their former team leader. He was about to commit suicide.
Mm.
So after that process, and I don't know if every organization does this, but they had a debrief for the whole team because the whole team had to deal with it. And one of the officers or one of the sergeants on the team, he openly admitted, he was like, man, I thought about committing suicide myself too last year, but I was too fearful of telling anybody. But the first person he ever told was that counselor because he felt okay to do it. So the reason why I reference that story is if you're going through something and you don't know who to talk to, go to somebody that's licensed to do it. Go to someone that's paid. Now, there was another story I heard a guy named, I think Michael Sugru, I think he said it in his book, Relentless Courage. He talked about the first therapist he went to when he was going through things. The therapist was like, just get over it. If you go to that kind of therapist, kick him out, go to the next. Trust me, there's going to be someone out there that wants to build you up. So if you've gone to a therapist, you said, oh, that person didn't work for me, go to another one. There's going to be someone that matches, but you need to find somebody that's neutral, that just wants to hear you, and someone that knows how to answer. So that's why I said be mindful of sometimes maybe your family member. Not saying you can't use them, but
Sure.
they're just going to give you mostly positive words, most of them. Like I have some family members that will sometimes give it to me raw, but then again, they're not licensed or trained in that area. So find someone that does this for a living. Like if I wanted to go shoot a gun, I wouldn't go to an accountant. I would go to a firearms instructor. So if you want to get therapy, go to someone that's licensed to it because it will benefit you and you will see the increase. So what Steve was saying about finding somebody or go somewhere, guys. I can tell you my own experience, and I want to be transparent on the show. I do it,
that.
and I love it. I have my next appointment in a couple of weeks. It's because it helps me wrap my mind around what's going on because we all deal with a lot of things, not just at work, but at home as well. And once you realize that your mind needs that release, you're going to feel a lot better and be able to develop yourself better.
Yeah, no, man, I appreciate you taking the time to share that, just that personal experience and the personal touch that has on your life. And look, at the end of the day, when we go to these jobs, when we see the hard things, that's we're trying to make a living. Yes, we're trying to make a difference in the community, but we do have to come home to our wives, to our children, to our families. I don't care if it's just your dog you got to come home to, but you got to come home and you got to keep living, right? You can't, the job, no matter what that is, cannot take over and absorb so much of your energy that you can't enjoy this wonderful thing we call life because it is awesome, man. Like
I love it.
experience what we experience on a job and then to come home and be able to take care of children, to take care of our spouses. There's no greater gift than to be able to do those things, and we need to do those things at the highest level, and we can't do it if we're not looking after ourselves. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, man, no, I appreciate all the energy that you're putting into the
Mhm.
wellness, and it sounds like you're learning right along the way,
Got to.
and changing, man. So that's awesome to put time into education. Well, look, man, how do people get in touch with you and hear about what you're doing, and if there's agencies out there that would like to bring you aside? Can you talk a little bit about some of the services and things that you're trying to bring to the table to better not
Mhm.
only individuals but entire departments and businesses? Let's put that out there as well.
Well, for me, my most favorite platform is LinkedIn right now. And it's because you have a lot of people that are professionally trying to make people better.
Mm.
So if you're looking for me, that's my best platform. You just type in Michael Laidler. You're going to see a photo of this guy holding a book in his hand, or just you'll see me and it'll say something like professional speaker or something like that. On that'll be me. My other platforms, I'm on Instagram a little bit. I kind of post maybe once or twice a week. I have my YouTube channel, which I post weekly on. And there's a lot of leadership, different things about leadership I put on there. I have my podcast, kind of like yours, Steve. Mine's
Yeah.
called the LEO First Podcast, and is very similar to Steve's, but not as good.
Oh, no,
Not as good as Steve.
no, man.
So
I've listened to some
hey, it's
episodes. I
okay to
love
be
what you're
second,
doing.
guys. I'm good with being second. So, but usually that's the best ways. You can always find my website, which is michaelaidler.com. But anything you look for, if you type me in, I've learned through my own mentorship and reaching out to people is that you have to have a lot of different ways to reach people. So
Mm.
that's why I do LinkedIn. I do post daily. I do YouTube videos weekly. I have the Leo First podcast. I do speaking engagements. I now have online courses. I actually, Greatness Beyond the Badge, my signature course. I just released the online version of it because I realized that I can't get everywhere. So I made it available on Teachable, just so all places that can't bring me in or they don't know, they can still find some more information. But guys, if you're looking for anything, I'm always open to a phone call, a text, an email. And if I'm not the right person for you, at this point in my career, I can find the right person for you. I
There you go.
promise you that
That's
because
awesome.
I've done enough. If it's me saying, hey, go back to Steve, he can take care of it, whatever it is, guys, because there's a lot of demand for what we do, but not enough supply. There's a lot of people wanting help. There's a lot of people needing help. There's just not enough people to instruct it and teach it. We
Yeah.
may think the market's saturated with instructors, but it really isn't. Once again, if it was saturated with people that knew about leadership, we wouldn't have leadership problems. If it was saturated with people that talked about self-awareness, we wouldn't have self-awareness problems. So if I don't know and you're like, hey, I don't really don't want to hire you or bring you in, I just want you to tell me about somebody else, I'm cool with that. I just want to make sure you're growing as a company. I want to make sure you're growing as an individual because that's what it's all about. We already deal with enough stress dealing with the community, but we don't need to be fighting ourselves internally or truly internally when it comes to our growth. So if you're looking for me, those are the main platforms. Reach out, reference Steve, so I know where you got this from, so I can give him a shout out. But definitely, if you guys have any questions, I'm open to them.
Yeah, right on, man. No, what you're putting out there, I mean, since we connected and I've got to see some of the YouTube channel and some of your speaking stuff, watch some of the stuff you're putting out there, listen to the podcast. It's so solid, man. I commend you on just, I know it's laborsome, and I know, you're sacrificing time with that family, and you're sacrificing maybe some other things to be able to just put valuable information out
Mhm.
there. So keep pressing hard at what you're doing, man. Keep making the connections. We're gonna push as many people as we can. Everything that Michael just said is gonna be down in the show notes. Take a look at that. I'll make sure everything's captured in there. And better yourself, right? Go out, become a better communicator, become a
Mhm.
better leader. Read some books, watch some shows, listen to some podcasts. There's no excuse for you not bettering yourself. And if this
Right.
conversation is one step forward to getting people the information to be able to connect with somebody, man, I'm grateful for you and what you're doing. And
Thank
I'm
you.
always shocked, man, at a platform such as a podcast from a couple of guys out trying to work the streets and do different things, that
Mhm.
it has the ability to reach so many people in this culture that we live in today. And
Absolutely.
I feel very grateful for the opportunity to do that.
Mhm.
So I give you a lot of credit for
Yeah.
reaching out. No worries on the on the lighting. So Anyway, I'm rambling, but Michael, any final thoughts, things that we didn't cover that you wanted to get out there to all the listeners?
Yeah. So if I, and you know what, I want you to play this live. I want you to keep this unedited, and if you guys, hopefully, Steve, you keep it this way because I want to let people know we're real people doing real things. Right
Yeah.
now, my light went out again. I don't know what happened to it. I'm at to diagnose it. These are like studio lights, like $150 per light. So, but this is life, guys. Life
Yeah.
shows you different things. And I'm actually kind of excited this is happening right now because you guys, we want you to know this is unscripted. This isn't things we planned for 5 years. We don't have a teleprompter in front of us. We're not sitting here trying to take like notes to each other, say, hey, say this or say that. This is real time stuff, guys. For my final words, and we didn't touch on it, we didn't get a chance to. And one thing I learned to do to control all the things I have going on as far as my time goes is something I call the 24-hour formula.
Mm,
Because what I realized, if you're not planning your day out, time will slip away. So, for example, I have 3 podcasts today, but I planned them. I literally structured them because I knew what I had going on my day. So I planned family time in there. I planned exercise. I planned reading, but I planned the podcast as well. So if you don't control your time, it's going to control you. If you
mm.
want to be the best version of yourself, you have to look at things like that. What are you doing on a daily basis to grow yourself? So, in my final words, if I had to say anything, is manage your time and grow yourself daily.
Right on, man. That's a strong final word. I thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for coming on, man. This was a solid time, and everybody that is listening, man, make sure you push out there everything Michael's doing. Listen to his podcast, give him a shout out, and we'll get the word out there. Thanks for what you're doing, brother, and I appreciate your time coming on today.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you.